All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest tonight is Toby Johnston, and we're going to be talking about the Owl Moon Lab. And normally, Toby Johnson, normally, I get into the person and the history and so on as the first step, but really, I think the owl and she says I was reading about this book. It's more than just a book, isn't that right?
Well, I hope so. You could use it as a paperweight. You could set a beer on it.
Right,
There's
but
all
there's
sorts
a lot of interactive, technologically interactive aspects.
I know. Yeah, I kid because it's the first book I put out, so I'm new to the authorship world, and maybe people will use it for that. But inside the book is a few surprises embedded are QR codes that are attached to the chapters. So as you read along in the story, the true account of, I guess, my story and the Owl Moon Lab and the Addams family, which is who the book is largely written about as its property. And so as you read along, you get a hold of a QR code that's attached to the chapter. And as you're reading it, you can go transport yourself right to that chapter because we filmed everything, all the audio, all the video, all the paperwork, all the guests that arrived, the witnesses, the documentary that is coming out about it. It's all embedded in these QR codes. So not my idea. That's through a guy much smarter than me named Doug Hychek of Monster Quest fame. So without Doug, I wouldn't have had that.
Yeah, well, when I read it, it was one of those moments because I'm a guy that likes to create stuff and I do some marketing and stuff like that. And when I read it, I'm just all, duh, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of this? So I thought it was a really clever idea, really good idea. Now, the title of the book, let's break that down because I'm not really sure what
the
tongue
teaser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why the owl?
So the Owl Moon Lab.
Yeah.
Yeah. The name of the book is The Owl Moon Lab, A Paranormal Experiment. And we vacillated a little bit on the title, but the title wrote itself about 2018 when underneath the full moon in the little town of Cottage Grove, Oregon on Good Friday, I believe it was March 30th, 2018. The moon was also called the Owl Moon, which I think under pagan traditions you would find that the Owl Moon or the Dog Moon or these different full moons have names after animals. So underneath the Owl Moon, we found what appeared to be giant knee impressions in the mud above this property. And we cast these knee impressions, took the hair from the knee impressions and sent them up for analysis. And once we cast these, now we know they are knee impressions of something plus or minus 1,400 pounds with anomalous hair that doesn't come from anywhere on the charts that we know of. And that was via a gal up in Canada named Cindy Dosen, who works for the Olympic Project, that we found that out. Once we brought this casting back of these giant knee impressions, and we are fast forwarding through, a lot of history right now to get to where we are to talk about the title. But that's where the name came from, the Owl Moon. The lab portion is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing because in the process of having legitimate supernatural Sasquatch encounters, UFOs, EVPs, amazing EVPs, I'm also in the process of building a Sasquatch replica. So as a joke, the homeowners who were gracious enough to lend me their garage to build this giant 8.5 foot tall Sasquatch for Ron Moorhead, he said, oh, it's like, Frankenstein's laboratory now in my house. And so because of that, all these things started to pile up. So the Owl Moon Lab, although we did do experiments in this house on the property, they were rudimentary at best compared to what I would do now. And so that's where it got its name.
So, sorry, Tara, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned right there a couple of different phenomena. You mentioned Bigfoot, you mentioned EVPs, you mentioned UFO sightings, and those are things that are often put together, but often you find, UFO people who are like, don't talk to me about EVPs, or you find Bigfoot people who are like, it's just a big ape, right? But it seems, but we're sort of putting them together into more of a, like, sort of a synthesized thing. Are these related phenomenon, or are they separate?
It's an ecosystem of weirdness, and you can't push one phenomena out from the ecosystem if it doesn't fit your worldview or your narrative. I mean, if we go back
Right.
to John Keel, you would look into the Mothman prophecies and say, oh, we just have this apparition that seems to, be a harbinger of doom or death. And that's the end of the story. But that's not where John Keel left off at the end of it. I mean, I remember seeing
Mhm.
pictures of him and video of him showing Sasquatch impressions on Johnny Carson or David Letterman. So it takes you in these weird directions, whether or not you want to go on them. What we argue, and it's not really an argument, it's just the way that this phenomena goes, is when the phenomena comes to you and comes to your property, more often than not, these people who are open about it and let you come live at their house like I did and write a book about it, uh, they get the stranger phenomena. Now, why would that be? Why is that? I'm not quite sure. It can be hostile at times. It can be friendly at times. It can be scary at times. But one thing that it isn't is predictable. The only thing predictable about it is it's not predictable. And so when I say we have these crystal clear EVPs, we weren't looking for them. We're trying to record Bigfoot audio, Bigfoot vocalizations. Like if we could get, anywhere near what Ron captured as far as samurai chatter, we would have been thrilled. But it just refused to stop there. And so the more that we were kind of honest with what we were trying to do, and we were a little confused about what we were trying to do. Were we actually trying to understand the phenomena on its terms, or were we thrill seekers?
Right.
And we had to be honest with the phenomena. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but like I said, we're fast forwarding through 15 years of me chasing after the phenomena previous to this. And I had been told that if you want to get close to it, you have to get close to extended experiencers. These are people that have backyard Bigfoot issues. And once you do, be prepared because the wheels probably will fall off as far as your expectation of this being a giant relic hominid. And I was game for it. I mean, I had waited so long, 15 years to get into a house like this. And so we engaged it. And I spent the better part of almost a year straight living and breathing, writing this book. Although I didn't really think it was going to be a book, I thought people would appreciate the story. And I just wanted to have a sighting. Like that was my whole goal. Is like, can I please see one already? I've chased down this damn dirty ape for the last 15 years. Please just give me a sighting.
Right.
And so kind of a funny problem to have is like, I just want to see a Bigfoot, but I keep running into these.
I don't care, just something.
Just get into these darn ghosts and, and UFOs. It's like,
yeah. And I was all too happy to engage those phenomena too, because, as a young man, when you walk into the library at school, where's Bigfoot? It's lined up with ESP, telekinesis, UFOs, all of it, right? I mean, and so that was already embedded. Well, it turns out that it is on the proper section of the library shelf, that Bigfoot actually does belong in that category. And I don't waver from that position at all after everything that has happened and continues to happen, because this phenomena has a half-life. It follows you. You look at the work of, Skinwalker Ranch. They talk a lot about the hitchhiker phenomena, where things follow you back home. And it will tip its hat big time to you and say, oh, yeah, we know where you live. We know you recognize this object because we left that right there on your coffee table, and here it is again. So these kind of things you can't say no to. There's no room for there being hijinks or there being a hoax, not with all the audio and video and eyewitness testimony.
Earlier, for one, we've been trying to come up with a new catchphrase for our radio show, and ecosystem of weirdness was worth writing.
Good.
But
that's a good one.
Being a thrill seeker, when you said that, it triggered something in me that I think at the beginning of understanding of any topic, that there has to be some level of thrill seekerness. I watched a movie about a guy building the first deep water dive suit with the hose, and that guy had to have been some level of thrill seeker / scientist. Or Jacques Cousteau building his his big crazy super boat. You know, there had to have been a thrill seeker aspect there of somebody willing to go out there and chase down God knows what. So I think you're allowed to be both. I think you're allowed to be both. But how'd you get connected with these people? Were you chasing leads down, or did they come to you? Was it divine how they just kind of showed up to you when you needed them most? Or?
No, it's a small community really of Bigfooters, and once you kind of get involved with going to a conference or a camp out, word gets around. And in this case, Daryl Adams, who is a recent retired contractor, had moved up from California to Oregon and attended something called Beachfoot, had a conversation with Ron Moorhead and said, hey, I know Tobe. He, lives right outside of where you're moving. Maybe you can go talk to him and he can take you out in the field sometime. And I'd kind of, taken my foot off the gas for a while and hadn't really looked into the phenomena for about 2 years or so. But when Daryl got a hold of me, it just was the perfect time. And so I ended up going in the woods with him and finding these knee impressions, which really, then without finding those knee impressions, I don't know where the story would have been. Maybe everything still would have happened in the order it did. Maybe it was destined to be talked about. It seemed, and that's the way some of these stories go, is that they seem like they are waiting for certain people to arrive at a certain time. It's almost like the tumblers in a lock, and everything has to line up. And especially if you're in a liminal state, that seems to be key. If you're in the middle of a big transition, and what are we in right now globally? So who knows what's about to happen? I mean, we have all the UFO stuff unfolding, which I don't think is by accident. Here we are in the middle of this huge transition with something called the Great Reset, this new order being established. And now all of a sudden we have, agreement that we might have off-world vehicles. And, it's a very strange time. So the same thing was happening to me on a smaller level, a big life transition. And at that point, there was so much that happened immediately that I'd already been accustomed to. For example, the couple asked me to move into the house. And so I brought my 16 or 17 foot long camper and all my worldly possessions and parked them right outside their house. And we basically wanted to see if these knocks and hits that were coming around the property could be recorded. And so the long-term study of figuring out whether or not these were only Sasquatch sounds began. And so 1,400 hours worth of audio was recorded for about a year. And I'm being kind with that number. I think it was actually more. So I'm working full-time, recording audio and video full-time, and then coming back and trying to play, Bigfoot.
Right.
Only
Trying to re-listen.
it refused to just be Bigfoot, because then these EVPs started showing up. And the EVPs were so complex that we knew it wasn't Sasquatch because we were hearing human language. We were hearing English. There was the circumstances of how this property came to be, which was kind of odd, which also is a timing issue. The people that owned the property before had suddenly sold the house. A whole family had lived there and moved only 45 minutes down the road and sold it for about $35,000 less than asking price at the top of the real estate market. And shortly afterwards, the eldest son commits suicide.
Oh, God.
So we kind of find all these things out as we're looking for Bigfoot. Like, why did these people move out? Why would this kid kill himself? Well, we found out that his bedroom, his old bedroom, was probably the most haunted part of the house. And we didn't plan on having a haunting at the same time, but this is where the EVP started, was in this kid's bedroom, where eventually he would commit suicide. And he ended, the EVP we got said, "I'm dead." And it was, it sounded like a child's voice, probably 14 years old. And so it was a controlled area as much as we could. And, at first you're trying to rule out whether or not this is some kind of sound contamination. If anything is a contamination, whether or not it be just for lark of someone playing a game with you, or whether or not you're hearing what you want to hear. Because I totally had Bigfootitis. Like, I'm a Bigfoot researcher, right?
Right.
I'm out here doing this, so I'm going to have confirmation bias. So that's when I started inviting other people out, just like, hey, I need confirmation here. Let's all leave out recorders, and you go home and listen to what you got. And that's when the gifts started showing up. And by gifts, I mean objects of significance meant for you. And they were left in a real specific place so you would find them and nobody else. One of the most common striking examples is after we were looking for a taxidermied rabbit, and we were building the Sasquatch replica, and I thought, well, what better example than to put a rabbit maybe at the base of Bigfoot's feet to symbolize the rabbit hole. And so we're looking on
Scale.
looking for a taxidermied rabbit. Well, I get home from work and there's a dead rabbit with a rock lodged in its head sitting in front of my trailer. Now, it's so fresh in the middle of summer, it has no bugs on it and no predation marks.
Yeah.
Just a rock. And it's laying right in front of my camper. My girlfriend gets a hold of me and says, wow, thank God they didn't leave you a snake. You hate snakes. And 3 days later, there's a snake with its head ripped off sitting right where the rabbit was left.
Yeah, we need a statue of the neighbor's kid to put under the Bigfoot, and then you would have found something absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it got real, real quick. So it's very hard to turn away from death. Here we are asking for something dead, having barbecues. They know that we're meat eaters, but, I'm looking for a rabbit, a taxidermy rabbit. They give me something even better. They give me a fresh cottontail rabbit with hardly any damage to it. The snake seemed to be a joke. So those are just two really brief examples. And so as people are reading along in this book, they get to the chapter on the snake. They take their smartphone, they scan the QR code. It takes you to the moment I hop out of my Jeep Commander with my iPhone and see this rabbit sitting there. Call Daryl out and say, you got to see this, man. Stop whatever you're doing. And so to have those moments, to be transported automatically as you're reading along. If it wasn't seamless, we wouldn't have done it, but it is seamless. As long as you have a good internet connection, you just scan along and away you go.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Is there, because you're in there and you're trying to be detached, logical, try to figure out what's going on there. I never thought of this as being a problem, but is there a point where you're just all like, well, did the ghost or did the Bigfoot leave me the snake?
Yeah.
And what exactly am I even able to untie this knot of two different things that I still don't know what they are, and yet I'm supposed to untie the knot?
Well, yes and yes. There's no way to know for certain because this stuff loves to keep the secrets coming. The clues and the questions are pretty much all you really have for the most part. But this story, there was so much physical evidence. I mean, it started with these knee impressions, which at first I thought, well, I do a podcast about the paranormal. I'll just film the process of me casting these probable bear knees that are squatted down. So that's how we took it. Just like we'll show people the process of casting. But when they came back as 1,400 pounds and anomalous hair, and then an orthopedic surgeon looks at them and says, those are giant human knees, but they're not human. So that's where we kind of thought it might end. I was ready for it all to end with the knees, but then we had these giant handprints show up on 3 different occasions around the house. And they're large, greasy handprints, 3 times the size of any man I've ever seen. And they were just, embedded or infused onto the pickup truck, onto the garage, onto my trailer, with hair attached into the greasy impression of where the fingers were. And so to see that, I'd never cast hand impressions before, let alone, tried to extract any kind of cellular DNA or anything off of it. But we kind of went to the school of hard knocks and would laugh about like who's going to go down to the Dollar Tree to make their own, $5 forensic kit and come back and try to cast these hand impressions.
Right.
So we did. And So was that Sasquatch that did that? Probably, because previous to this, over those 15 years we're skipping, was example after example of extended experiencers being gifted objects of significance, as though Sasquatch was listening, paying attention, hearing the needs of others, and then leaving objects of significance for. This is not ghost behavior. Now, we did have apportation phenomena at the property, and we actually filmed apportations not occurring on camera, occurring off camera. And if anybody doesn't know what an apportation is, I don't think this is Bigfoot related. But if we're to go with the theory that this was a portal and we had the phenomena of all these things coming freely in and out, to record an apportation happening is very rare. I've only seen maybe one actually happen on camera. And so
let me cut you off there. This is not
Sure.
a word I'm familiar with, but from the context, does that mean the opening of a portal?
Right. Well, it could. An apportation would be a physical object appearing or disappearing out of nowhere in live time. And in this case,
and disappearing. Gotcha.
Yeah. So imagine pennies falling from heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the phenomena people would talk about. In fact, coins in general falling from the sky or something associated with poltergeist. In fact, in Poltergeist, I believe there's several apportations in the movie that happen. And so we would have these happen. The only thing is that these apportations have a sound to them. And trust me, this is a lot to take in here in the next few seconds, but we were trying to come up with many theories as we could so we could study the phenomena, understand the phenomena. And when we recorded, 1,400 hours worth of audio, we kept hearing these strange tapping, hitting, reflexive sounds, almost like something, when you hit a snare drum and it kind of makes a sound, an echo to it. It's, called a flam or a reflexive tone. We would hear these sounds. Maybe it was like a fingernail clicking the side of the recorder. The only thing is a lot of times we're recording in the middle of a gravel bed. So there really was no way for anything to get into the recorder without an approach sound in the gravel. And more often than not, we would get these clicky, tappy sounds. The point being is that I think some of these sounds were physical objects being gifted to us. So is that just Sasquatch? Man, I don't know. There's so many examples of there being something other happening than Bigfoot on this property. And people were telling us that as much. The farmers around us were all kind of weird, and they would talk about strange things that have happened behind them and in the hillside. One of the guys was a soil farmer we called Wormy, and he was an interesting fella. And so Wormy would come down once in a while and make fun of us because we're looking for Sasquatch. And finally he goes, well,
It's got to be sobering when Wormy's making fun
when
of
Wormy's making fun of you. When Wormy makes digs at you, no pun intended. He kept saying, why are you looking in the forest when you should be looking in the sky for the chandelier? And I said, what? And he said, yeah, there's a flying something in the sky. It looks like a swinging, glowing chandelier, and it drops down below the forest level. And we would catch him out at weird times at night looking for UFOs with his wife. And one day he shows up with this giant red mark on his forehead about the size of a basketball that hits you, plonks you on the head. And he has no idea where that red mark comes from. And that red mark stays on his forehead for a period of like 2 or 3 months, all through the summer of 2018. And he went on to explain, how his wife gets hit in the face by giant rays of light out in the back. You can't help but kind of go there with there being maybe an abduction scenario happening here that Wormy's not going to talk about.
Right.
But so all the neighbors are telling similar types of strange stories. So now we know it's not just us. They're not all in on it. It's not like a Scooby-Doo episode. And so we start shooting a documentary. In fact, I'm co-producing a documentary that comes out next year in February called Flash of Beauty, which tells this story. But what better than to have 2 separate camera crews come out and basically say, hey, come down here whenever you want. I'm not going to be here. Have your own experiences. You tell me what you think's going on. And when they start having experiences, that's when I was the happiest, because I knew that they were skeptical of the claims, because we were, after I'm telling you here the last 25 minutes of some of the claims, people are a little bit skeptical. And so they start having their own experiences. Apers, people that see the phenomena only as being Gigantopithecus or Sasquatch as being a relic hominid, started to have supernatural encounters. And a lot of these people were willing to go on camera and talk about it because it was so real, so transformative, so in your face. And so that's made me the happiest, is that I've been able to step away. I've actually moved out of state. And now the Owl Moon operates all on its own. People are having their own experiences, probably like they've had for thousands of years in that location. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's about 10% of the story.
I was actually about to ask about how far back you thought these sort of phenomena go in that area. Did you find any information about like the history of that, or?
It gets into the word Hebron, which is takes a sharp turn out of nowhere as far as the story is concerned. And I write about who the Hebron are, why the Hebron might be attached to this property. But in short, we believe they were a group of religious fundamentals that moved out west along the Oregon Trail and set up shop in what is now the Cottage Grove lake bed. And if you look into the Hebrons and who they were previous to them being pioneers, you go back to the book of Genesis, and it talks about the land of Hebron. Well, the last place that the Nephilim were seen was near Mount Hebron. And so for that connection to come up, for the Hebron people to be associated with this story, at least the Church of Hebron, there's a Hebron Road, for the word Nephilim to be attached to this. And if anybody doesn't know what the Nephilim are, 1/3 of the angels came down and impregnated human women and begot their own spirits. And one of the theories, of course, is that if we're looking at a paranormal,
I want to say,
if we're looking into a paranormal link of Sasquatch, and they do have some kind of superpower, maybe this is where they derive it from. And so this link of the Hebron people refused to go away. And it seemed to be constantly toying with us that this has, that the land has unique links to Israel, that the land has unique links to Ukraine, and the people of the Ukraine. And there's some weird.
I get Israel. What's in Ukraine?
Well, there was a great immigration that happened, migrants heading out to the Ukraine and setting up shop. And it seemed to tip its hat to us that was important for us to know. I'll just leave it at that. And so some of the EVPs is what I'm alluding at, led us down these strange directions. Now, is that an end road? It could very well be. That maybe that's not an important detail, but
sounds like I think one of many roads.
Yeah, I think it might be, because people don't talk about these end roads enough. Like the fingernail tapping on the microphone. Bigfooters don't talk about that sound. They don't think it's important. I think it's hugely important, because you can get that sound when you put it inside a cardboard box locked away inside of a house. How is that possible? And then you find strange handprints outside the door. You find gifts outside the door. It seems to be some kind of introduction to like, hey, I know you have a recorder in here. Here I am. And thus begins the initiation. Now, is it only with recorders that this happens? Largely, audio seems to be okay. Camera equipment is no bueno as far as Sasquatch is concerned. In general, we just don't seem to have, the permission slip to freely video record them. And I have my own theories on why that would be, but when it comes to audio equipment, that's what I always suggest.
Unfortunately, this kind of undoes my previous question. Earlier you were talking about how going down to the dollar store and making your makeshift mold, trying to get the DNA. You hadn't done this before. So it kind of prompted the question in my head, do you think if science took all this stuff seriously that we would have this figured out by now? But I guess this moves on to the question, when you started this, it sounds like you were more of a nuts and bolts Bigfoot researcher. And by the end of this, you're kind of hands up in the air going, I'm not sure anymore. Is that
I was just
accurate?
no, I was literally just a fan with a technical theater background. And so I had I had an artsy fartsy background, and I literally just wanted to meet these people that had spent their lives looking for this. And of course I wanted to engage the phenomenon, see the phenomenon. I was an outdoorsy guy.
Mhm.
But yeah, in part, mostly you're correct. It was a transition point from having no position to having a very definite position.
Gotcha.
And there's always a price to pay for your position in life. But when your position weeps results, I have no problem with that position, and there's no sacrifice with it. Like, if people aren't down with my theories, it's all the better for me because I don't have them out in these areas here chasing down these rabbit holes, in my way. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but as it relates to the phenomenon here, what you find out quickly is that people get, they get pretty ruthless as far as, how they treat you if you go down a certain road they don't approve of. And I just never sought anybody's approval.
So, to my earlier question, then, do you think that if science took this as seriously as they took something else, that we would have this figured out by now? It wouldn't be people trying to makeshift stuff that they and learn sciences that they are just throwing themselves into with curiosity.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, again, I guess it comes down to the natural preternatural aspect of the situation, because for all these things to happen in one place, it just makes you wonder, is Bigfoot a part of it? Is it a catalyst? Is it a coincidence? Is it, it just kind of opens everything up at that point. I stayed out at a cabin a couple of years ago with friends of mine, and I'm curious about how the Adams felt about this. We're sitting on the back porch, and there's like a whole grove out front of trees, and it's beautiful. And it's like 12 o'clock at night, and, we're sitting around the fire, and my buddy John's just all, yeah, but don't go walking out front if you got to pee, pee over there or go inside. And we're all, what? Why? He's just all, well, the bears are probably all in the trees right now eating the fruit. And like, we had this realization that there was probably a mob of bears like 50 feet away from us eating in the trees. Were the Adams scared, on a regular basis? Or was this sort of like, oh, those are my kind tree neighbors? Or was it like, oh, it's after 10, get the kids inside,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it got spooky with the surprises happen, especially after the sun went down, when you're devoid of the senses of being able to hear anything coming at you and being able to see anything. And then suddenly all hell breaks loose. That's, frightening, especially in the quiet of the lonely Cottage Grove woods. Right. And so those kind of things, I couldn't always be there in my trailer. I was working graveyard shift as a truck driver. And so oftentimes I'd be gone, and I'd get texts and say, oh my gosh, there was this huge slap on the side of the wall, or we just saw this giant flash of light come into our bedroom. Those kind of things would happen, but then they'd happen to me too. I mean, but I'm sick. Like, I'm an adrenaline junkie, dude. Like, for me, people don't get it, but I would lay out in a zero gravity chair waiting for the hell to be scared out of me, hoping that it would be confirmation that this stuff is actually real, because even though I've explained this all to you, I'm still waiting for the shoe to drop. Just like, oh, it was that. Like, one time we found out that a bird was roosting inside this haunted shop, this haunted garage that we haven't really talked about yet. But when we were recording, we would hear these strange sounds. Well, birds make roosting sounds at night trying to get in and out of this metal shop. So that bummed me out. But then it's almost like the phenomena knew that was going to happen. And then something strange would hit the side of your trailer, or you'd find, like the dead rabbit. One time I was having cell phone issues on I-5 coming down from Washington to Oregon in my semi truck, and I'm talking to Daryl, who's at home barbecuing, and I'm like, yeah, I got to stop by T-Mobile and pick up a new cell phone. I'll be home later. Well, I had my 14-foot long aluminum boat parked next to my trailer, and so I'm getting home, and underneath the oar of my boat is a muddy Sidekick telephone, as though it has been dug out of a pond or a creek or a dump, and it is hidden underneath the oar of my boat. There's no explanation for that whatsoever. Continued on that same note, a couple days later, I put up some shiny Christmas type lights on the awning of my camper, which, sat out to block the hot Cottage Grove sun. So I hung some Christmas lights, and underneath the oar of my boat is a vintage Christmas ball from like the 1950s with a little cranberry glued on top of it, totally ornate, gently placed under the oar. You get familiar with the fact that these things are going to start to connect dots of what's going on in your life. And so those kind of things, they didn't freak me out. I was honored, man. To have a moment like that is not scary. Is that scary to you guys? Because to me, that didn't freak me out at all. For me, it was just utter confirmation.
I know that there would be a moment of fear when you realize that a 1,400-pound creature is watching you at night, knows what your walking patterns are, and is ready to drop a dead snake in the path. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's unnerving.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're saying that this place lives on now. It prompts a question for me, because you were talking about going down the same rabbit hole, and it kind of got me thinking about reporters and maybe how reporters butt heads when they come on a story. And it made me, do Bigfoot researchers ever discover each other at night? You know what I mean?
What? Yeah. In fact, yeah. I don't know if I included this story, but absolutely, yes. Yes and yes, because when an area is hot or there's a missing person involved, and there's researchers going there, and in the case of what I'm talking about, both those things are true. Yes, there was a particular profound moment that happened near the Three Sisters Wilderness, where me and another Bigfoot researcher found each other the day after he had been urinated on while he was Bigfooting. And is a little bit of a long story, but in short, he goes, here's your, yeah. So we stopped there in the middle of the highway. He's telling me this incredible story, and he goes, here's your Bigfoot evidence. And he throws his wet Carhartts at me, and it's covered in urine. And he goes, well, it was worse than that. They unzipped my backpack and peed a gallon of pee in my backpack and zipped it back up. So those kind of stories, I mean, how are you ever going to forget that? So it's not always a bad thing to find another researcher out in your area, especially if they're friends of yours. But I've never wandered into anybody. I mean, that's the biggest fear, is you're going to wander into a tweaker, or somebody, right. Not another researcher or Bigfoot. The worst thing you can find out at night is another human. Like, the scaredest I've been is at the end of an old logging road at 2 a.m. and you see headlights coming. That's when you start going to your car to grab your AR. I mean, it's not the other stuff. The other stuff there's a lot of gamesmanship, and it's like it's just waiting to see your expression on your face while they try to scare you. And that's not the motives of humans. The motives of humans are they seem to be, much darker at times.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. The darkest an animal's going to get is to want to eat you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But even that intention can't necessarily be considered evil,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did this end for you? How did you decide? I mean, it seems like an ongoing, never-ending.
Mm-hmm.
Let me guess. You figured you had enough audio to listen to for the rest of your life?
It didn't end. It ended up following me up to the Olympic Peninsula. It vacillates between showing itself here and not showing itself for periods of time. I always compare my Oregon story, the Al Moon Lab, as Vegas, and Washington as being, like the retirement home. Yeah, you get the occasional visit, but it ain't like it was in Vegas. And these are definitely like the fat Elvis years of my life when
Right.
it comes to the phenomena. So, um, maybe those things will change. I mean, don't get me wrong. When it goes off here. Like the camper that I talked about earlier, um, I've seen things in that camper within the last 6 months. Um, you know, not balls of. So the orb phenomena is something that people need to get used to when they're looking into Sasquatch. Lights, organic balls of light. These are things you see before Bigfoot, generally speaking, before Bigfoot approaches you, you might see an orb. You usually don't see them afterwards. Usually see an orb, and then you may get Sasquatch phenomena. So those orbs followed us up here. Now, they've been up here in the Olympic Peninsula long before we got here, but this trailer seems to have these orbs come around them. I've had people stay in my trailer, kind of like an Airbnb situation, and they complain about seeing these black orbs. Now, I'd never even heard of such a thing as seeing black orbs. It's almost like a grayish color, like a dirty gray. And I've seen one of these inside the trailer. It's not a very large trailer. It's just floating right in front of me as I'm watching a show on Netflix. Never seen anything like it. It looked like the hide of an elephant. It had that kind of organic skin color, gray skin color to it. A spherish ball, dirty gray ball, and it just went right through the wall. So that's something maybe unique to this property. I don't know, but the phenomena, if I put a recorder out in my trailer, I'm going to get something crazy that happens. Right now we have my girlfriend's son living in the camper. He claims there's nothing going on. And so maybe it's me. I don't know, but if I can get it on audio, then it's not just me. There's something else happening.
Now, I know researchers in general don't like to speculate on the mic, but you got to have a good speculation. It's like coming out of this. Do you think that there's the belief that we interviewed Ronald Moorhead, and this was one of the questions, and he didn't have much of an answer either, other than fun speculation. But there's the belief that interdimensional gold digger is like one of them. But I mean, you got to say, if it is something like interdimensional like that, it would account for all the other weirdness going on. It's like, but are you left with a theory that you like the best?
Well, they seem to be attached to nature in a way that reminds me of an elemental, and it's hard to not call them an elemental because of the reports I've taken of people that see them go into trees. And if you look into the history of the Green Man and what the Green Man actually is a giant forest guardian, an elemental, and so entrenched and in tune with the forest and nature that he is nature. So maybe that's why we can't record them at will. Maybe they feel the element of, I don't know, the EMF meter or the the electromagnetic frequency coming off a camera or recorder laying inside the middle of the woods would be a little bit like a sliver in your hand. And so maybe they feel that happening, and maybe that's why we can't study them at will. But I see them as such. There's a lot of reports of other things out there besides Sasquatch that seem attached to the elemental category. Maybe these orbs are them. There's a lot of people that say that they see an orb come out the backside of a tree where a Sasquatch walked in. Generally, if you do have an orb sighting, red orbs in particular, orange orbs, you're going to have more of an aggressive Sasquatch encounter. These are things that I don't really hear anybody else talking about, but after you interview a certain sect of people that are willing to talk about the paranormal stuff, including Ron, I mean, him and Carrie, his girlfriend, saw a giant lightsaber flowing through the woods when they're out there bigfooting in the high Sierras. David Paulides puts it in one of his recreations, and Ron's had some incredible stuff happen in the supernatural realm associated with the Sierra Nevadas. Most Bigfooters have, and that's, I guess, what I want to say is that most people that are really into this, I mean, they're really into it. They know the Bigfoot players, they know the Bigfoot history like people know baseball history. They collect all the memorabilia like people collect baseball cards. They're total Bigfoot nerds. Most of
I
these
understand
people,
nerddom.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Most of these Bigfooters have had supernatural experiences while they're out Sasquatching, and they don't talk about it because it doesn't play well in the world of science yet. But now that we're talking about transmedium craft from the Pentagon, as far as the UFOs are concerned, and that kind of transparency coming from the top down is going to give a lot more flexibility to the rest of the paranormal world, including cryptozoology. And I think it's not going to be too far in the future before every Sasquatch conference is going to have a UFO speaker and a ghost speaker along in tandem. And you're already seeing it. And so I don't think that these are going to be separate categories anymore. So to answer your question, I'm going with Alex Elemental.
I like that answer, and it does. It prompts a pop culture reference, which lots of things do for me, as Kara knows. And I'm going to mispronounce the name, but Hiro Miyazaki. Miyazaki is the last name, and he did a movie called My Neighbor Totoro. And in that, it's actually about
you are a nerd.
In that, it's actually about elementals taken from like old Japanese and Chinese myth, and there's actually black orbs, like dust particles, floating around. That's all a part of it. So I'm sure he's pulling it from something, because this author is kind of known for pulling from history and creating his own mythology around it. So,
yeah, and maybe it's nothing, but what if more Bigfoot researchers or people in the ghost world said, oh yeah, I didn't talk about these black orbs before, but you've seen them. There's so many things like this where people aren't talking about it. Like we recorded the sound of what sounded like a bowling ball on the property. As odd as that sound, it sounded like a stone ball being rolled down a granite sidewalk, and a little bit, or maybe like a granite tomb sliding open, like Bela Lugosi crawling out of his tomb. We record this sound all the time. In fact, I heard it with my own ears on one occasion. And these are sounds that are reported in haunted houses a lot. I know that Doug Hychek of Monster Quest had heard that sound as a little kid as well. So I just hope that, me bringing up some of these weirder things spurs new conversation, because the old conversation is super boring. Like I'm not into mid-tarsal breaks. I'm not into, learning about Travis Walton again. There needs to be a new conversation. And those are huge contributions to the community. But I mean, here we are now with the capability to have these new conversations because of what we're doing right here. I mean, we could never have done this in the world of talk show circa 2008, I think, when Talk Shoe came out, the first podcast. And so now here we are with Zoom. We're able to talk about these things freely and have these new discussions. So I hope we do, because they cost us nothing but our time to have them.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I do all this stuff because I love it and it's fun. That's my second time cutting you off. What were you going to say, Kara?
Oh, well, I was just going back to what you were saying earlier, in the way that the elemental idea is kind of a chilling one, because we destroy nature all the time. So I hope they aren't, really angry. That would make me worried. Like, if these beings with unknown supernatural capabilities are like part and parcel of the natural world, it's like, maybe I won't log there. Like I would be worried about that, but I don't know. Like, I don't know that there are any deaths or injuries or anything associated.
No, it makes me think of the log lady out of Twin Peaks.
Right? Yeah, exactly. This is all very Twin Peaks in point of fact.
Or wild animals in general. We're encroaching on their habitats, and they got no place to go as they're slowly dishomed and die off. Maybe it is something like that. Maybe it is where we're pulling them from their homes and they got no choice but to be seen now. Huh.
Yeah, they seem to have to live by our rules when they're here, i.e. they poop in the woods, they eat, they have to hunt, they leave footprints. But in their world, I don't know what that looks like in comparison to ours. Maybe they don't have clear cutting. Maybe they don't have those kind of worries. I think more often than not, that's where they are. That would explain why we don't see them all the time. I mean, the fact is that you can kind of guess where these creatures love to hang out. They love to hang out where there's an abundant supplies of a place to hide, hunt, eat, and sleep. And they don't seem to hang out there all the time. We just don't have that availability. Otherwise, why don't we have better footage of Patty the next week? We knew where Patty was, except all we have is that grainy footage. And we don't have a secondary anything. We have all this FLIR capability. We have the advantage now of 360 cameras, FLIR on drones. I mean, you can buy, I think for under a couple grand, you could attach a FLIR to a drone now and fly it for over 30 minutes over a ripe area, probably well over that. And yet we don't have those kind of answers because there's this type of godlike omniscience from these creatures, these beings. And however uncomfortable that is, they are very godlike. And man, you see, if you were to look up at Zeus in Greece and see a giant marble statue of a Greek god, right next to it could be Sasquatch as far as I'm concerned, because they can do the same things that the old Greek gods can do. And they're built like that. I mean, those were the giants of old, by the way. And here we go back to the argument of the Nephilim, these, in some cases, cannibalistic giants, right? This is what the Native Americans would say. But that wasn't my experience with these beings. I did, to fast forward, have an occasion where I saw something, finally, and I won't give it all away, but it was a compelling bit of visual evidence at the Al Moon Lab that I finally got a glimpse of something to say that had to be them, or at least a neighbor of theirs. Right. And so, it's still happening at the area as well, although there is clear cutting going on really close by. And there's clear cutting to the left and the right of it. And it's squeezing in closely to where a lot of this phenomena happen, because most of the phenomena happen behind the house on the hillside. And this is where the continued story of this documentary called Flash of Beauty comes out in February 2002, and it tells a 2-part chapter of Flesh and Blood, and the other chapter, our chapter, the more unusual paranormal link to what Sasquatch may be. And so that's what we've been working on besides this book, is doing an edit on this documentary. It'll be globally released worldwide, not just a YouTube situation. And so it's an exciting documentary. It's one of the most beautiful documentaries on the paranormal that's ever existed. And I didn't edit or film a single portion of it. It was all Jill Rimmensnyder and Brett Eichenberger out of Portland. But I've been a part of it for the last year and a half, and we're about ready to release it to the world.
In your discussion about this, that prompts a good question. In our world, we seem to be having this major dichotomy going on, or at least it's presented to us that way. And in the UFO community, that seems to be the case too. People seem to find somewhere to argue about it. So in the UFO community, you got these nuts and bolts guys, and then you got these sort of spiritual, more metaphysical ideas coming in, and they're kind of butting heads at these conferences and stuff. Is that starting to happen in the Bigfoot community? Do you get the old guard like sitting there going like, you young kids and your elementals?
Right. Yeah. And things simmered down after a couple beers. At first it's a little awkward, uncomfortable, because, maybe you've talked smack about another person and they show up, or there's drama, but if you stay out
especially
of that.
Especially in the Bigfoot community, because, it's a lot of armed mountain men.
Yeah. Hairy armed mountain men.
Right. Yeah.
The real Bigfoots all along.
Right. Yeah. That's when you get out your sponsorship to Manscaped. But no, I've learned to avoid most of that and deflect it with as much humor and as much alcohol as possible, preferably in that order. But it's not. No, you hear about it. And but no, it's for the most part, it's moving. Even though that the aper community is reluctant, it is moving away from that argument, and they know it. And it has to do a lot with the Pentagon releasing this UFO evidence. I mean, if we can get an out and out press conference to say that we are not alone, here are the beings, here are the craft, and this is the way it's worked. It changes everything as far as the Bigfoot conundrum, the ghost conundrum. I mean, what Bob Bigelow, Robert Bigelow, interested in now besides Skinwalker Ranch? He's interested in life after death. That's his main goal right now, is understanding what happens after we die. And so to have those things unfold in the Al Moon Lab seemed appropriate because it started with Bigfoot. It went right into the paranormal, wormholes, and orbs, and then it moved into the world of the ghost. And so life after death, is that the ultimate question that we should be asking? Maybe. There's even a little bit of a surprise in there regarding COVID at the very end of the book. I had to do a little rewrite because there was an acknowledgement of, well, definitely an acknowledgement over COVID. So we wrote about that. Well, they wrote about it, really. And so yeah, really interesting questions. I think there's probably more interesting questions than answers, and I don't even know if we know the right questions to ask.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the time we hear these things and we start to go like, oh, whatever, now they're throwing in UFOs and stuff. But, you can't understand an animal unless you understand what it eats. And so now you got to understand the plant. And you can't understand the plant unless you get the dirt in the air and so on and so forth. So, I don't think it's all that shocking that maybe mysteries would be tied together in a way that even just by a filament, just even by a really narrow tie, Okay, so where's the best place for people to find out more about you?
Oh, well, so if they want to listen to the show, it's kind of in hiatus right now because we're moving from Washington to Idaho. And that's going to be about a 4-month operation. And so, but if they want to listen and follow along, they can. It's called Strange Brow Radio, is my podcast. It was a podcast conceived in a pub, hence the word Brau, which is the German iteration of Brewhouse. So Strange Brow Radio, BRAU. And there you'll find archived episodes anywhere you can find a podcast, and YouTube and all that goodness. And yeah, great. If they want to get a copy of the book, then go to strangebrowradio.com or go to Amazon and just type in Al Moon Lab. And if they do and write a little review afterwards, that's the big thing that helps out the authors, is just putting a simple review and just let me know what you thought of it.
Awesome. And what's next for you after you move, of course?
Well, I'm working on a new book. That'll come out next winter, I think. And then we're gearing up for this documentary. That's the big one. I just got done finishing my second Sasquatch. It's in a museum in Forks, Washington, home of Twilight. And it's called Sasquatch the Legend.
The building of you've done it before.
Well, yeah, I've done it before. I sold it to a minor league baseball team in the little town of Eugene, Oregon on the first one. And so this new one is, you can go see it if you're ever in Forks. Not too many people go to Forks, but if you're ever in Forks, there is an outstanding museum and gift shop called Sasquatch the Legend, right off Highway 101, the last town before you hit the Pacific Ocean. And there's Biggie. He's 8.5 feet tall and sitting in the corner there at this gift shop. So I just finished that project, and I'm working on other reconstructions of cryptids as well, different types of cryptids.
Let me ask you an honest question. Do you really think that Kara looks like she'll never find herself in Forks?
Oh my God. Okay.
Go Team Edward.
She'll find herself in Forks.
I have been to Forks. I will have you know, I was in Forks years before the books came out.
Whatever. I was so into it. True. I was there before it happened.
No, because my grandparents live up there. It's the
Oh.
whole thing.
Okay,
It was
well, if
about
you're
an
ever there,
interesting
Kara,
story.
yeah, now you have a home.
Oh my God, just gonna roast me before we close out this episode.
All right,
Perfect.
Toby, thank
Oops.
you very much for being on the show. You've been listening to Toby Johnson here on Radio Wasteland. We've been talking about his book, The Owl Moon Lab, a paranormal experiment. You can find that on his website or on Amazon, just like everything else in the world. And if you need any of those links, come to our website, radiowasteland.us. Thank you very much, Toby, for being on the show.
All right. Nice to meet everybody.
All right.